r/pro revenge. Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. Story 1. 4 years ago, when I was 24, my mom died from breast cancer, and because both of my grandmothers also died from it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never turn, so I'd just be getting these screenings for no reason. I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they need to keep an eye on the other one, so I'd still need regular checkups for the other breast. I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for a bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mom and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring, but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge pink jagged scars on either side of my breast, each about 1 inch long and a 1/2 inch wide, and it caused me to go into severe depression where I got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors and getting physically sick just looking at myself. I went to a therapist who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with and I might not ever get over it, and the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I'll admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction, the plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural boobs were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller double D. Since then, my mental health has improved and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up as well as my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about those scars. Huge, bright, pink, jagged rays, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself. And now they're nicely hidden away and you can barely feel them. Nowadays, I'm 28 years old and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was before. My coworker, Jill, found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing. When my friend from years ago before the mastectomy was planning a holiday, she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and 6 people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months, Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to workers when I was in earshot, at one point saying I had more plastic than Barbie and calling me fake in 2 ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. I don't know what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the National Health Service, so I assumed Jill thought that I'd got my teeth done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS, but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom where there weren't any cameras. And Jill just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when Jill and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow, and Jill said, "You know all about being shallow," while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, "Do you know why I have these? A few years ago, the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge, ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first." And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left.
Hey, also, if you didn't know yet, me and a couple of my friends just launched Rufus rugs. Premium, custom hand-tufted rugs. Maybe you're just a fan of Naruto and want to show it off. Or maybe you just love Pokemon and want bus toys on display for everyone. Either way, we can make almost anything. So hit the first link in the description to learn more.
For the rest of the day, I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a witch. I replied that Jill was being a witch long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email and I'd spoken to her. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident about who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true, I was screwed. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract and there was a part in the complaint section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically, HR has asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face, and are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously, the 4 asks over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess as they'd happen on my break or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of names who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly earlier the next morning. I went around everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one, but no big deal. Now, these aren't the exact words as there are 16 letters, but to sum it up, here's the gist. My name is their name. I work with Jill, last name, and OP. On date, at time, approximately, I spoke with Jill, last name, during which she referred to OP as quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill, last name, has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed, their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people, and as it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and some anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page of my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer, and as I said this, I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get the supervisor. The supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." Supervisor took a deep breath and asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the 4 of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint, and all 3 of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me to be fired. The interview went something like this. It took over half an hour, and they kept asking me the same questions but phrased them in different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. Question. You said outside that you think Jill, last name, reported you. Why is this? Answer. Jill has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Question. Why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? Answer. I had no issue with her. Question. What issue does Jill have with you? Answer. 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants but didn't know about my cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Question. Why do you feel this is true? Answer. Here are 16 signed statements from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out, and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it and rough dates and times. Question. Rough dates and times? Answer. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. Question. What event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? Answer. For me, the harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent, but as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months, I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of the names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Question. Had you had a conversation with Jill before this regarding her comments about you? Answer. Several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Question. To your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? Answer. No, it wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because frankly it's none of her business and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker to avoid further harassment. Supervisor then stands up and says, "Well, I think we're done here." He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence, letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already, and decided on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called for a meeting with HR. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes, then come back, find a coworker, and say that HR wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday also got called in one by one, or each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30, it looks like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom had been interviewed. Then, finally, Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. 4:30-ish, Jill gets called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolls around and everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time. She packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from HR. My case is closed. Story 2. r/pro-revenge. I'm a team builder. A few years ago, I was sitting in a job interview and the hiring manager asked, "What do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your career?" This made me pause as I've been doing the same thing for over 25 years. I let the mists of memory transport me back in time. Dorian, the nurse manager. Kip, the program manager. Dr. Steve, the clinical director. Yeah, I had 3 bosses. I started on the unit as an already seasoned, jaded, registered nurse and soon discovered that most staff who worked there were very, very young and inexperienced. For many, this was their first real job. They assumed all the weird stuff that happened every day was just normal for the workplace. Dorian had decreed that no one was allowed to write incident reports for med errors or safety issues because it makes me look bad in a safety huddle. The non-clinical staff was allowed to pass meds, schedule changes without notice. Additionally, the department was easily the most toxic I'd ever worked in, with various cliques at constant war with one another. I could go on and on. The troubles began one day when I opened my email to a message from Dorian which stated very curtly that I was being investigated for an incident that happened in the unit, that I was to meet with HR to discuss it, and for possible disciplinary action. I was not to discuss the incident with anyone. No date was given, no medical record number, no indication of what the issue could be. I replied that I would need the above information, would speak with my union rep, and meet at a time convenient for me. Dorian declined to give information, so I declined to meet with him. I began receiving emails almost daily, each more threatening than the last. I printed them all, contacted my sister, an employment attorney. Tried not to start shaking whenever I had to check my email. I was keenly aware that this is intimidation 101, but it is remarkably effective when you know that. Because I'm not a direct follower, I was soon discussing this in the break room, and before I knew it, it had been approached by 3 other women who had all received the same email on the same day. The comparison showed the emails being sent about a minute apart. We did not work the same shifts or the same days, and we agreed to call in the union rep and refused to meet with HR. Dorian continued to escalate, including cornering us in the hall, stepping in from chest to chest and trying to stare us down. He was a very big guy. Before long, we were speaking to more and more women, and it came to light that Dorian had a bit of targeting them with this exact email, followed by others that were more and more threatening until the person would finally meet with HR, get written up for something vague, and then be forced to sign a non-disclosure/no retaliation agreement. It seemed that he just simply picked the wrong 4 women this time because we weren't having any of it. I can't tell you how much time at work I began to spend with people crying while recounting their stories. None had thought of calling in the union rep. They did not even know their Weingarten rights. So we began a plot. We had limited time, and our company has a long and unglamorous history of protecting people just like this. Before long, the entire team was united against the common enemy. LGBTQ staff wrote up statements, backed by witnesses, of grossly homophobic comments, often in the presence of patients. Staff who were immigrants made statements about racial slurs. A staff member who was incredibly petty and vindictive had been compiling a dossier on every perceived policy violation and wrongdoing on Dorian's part since his hiring date, and he prepped it for presentation to HR. The graveyard shift, all huge men, said, obviously, Dorian isn't trying to flex on us, but we want to help. So they spent a couple of nights cruising Dorian's social media posts and capturing screenshots of homo, trans, xenophobic, and misogynistic content. Worried that they hadn't done enough, the night staff even paid for a cheap background check, and wow, what a score. DUI, failure to appear, hit and run, domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon. Did the company not do a background check? The hell? Finally, 2 women came forward with complaints of harassment. One incident had even occurred in the presence of the assistant manager, and one was documented in an email. We were ready. We flooded HR with meeting requests, and our union rep coordinated the assault so that on Monday we met for simple harassment and intimidation. I met first, and HR seemed unimpressed by my complaint. Tuesday, all LGBTQ and staff subjected to racial slurs made their formal complaints. They said that the HR lady looked tired. Wednesday started with a background check, moved into the minutiae of policy violation, culminated with well-documented quid pro quo harassment. The union rep informed HR that the union's attorney was eager to know how to proceed. HR assured her that would not be necessary. That evening, Dorian posted a sign on his office door saying he would be away for a few days and to contact Kip or Dr. Steve if we needed anything. The graveyard shift reported that over the weekend, housekeeping came and removed everything from his office except his name tag, which the night staff took as a trophy. On Monday, at shift change, the chief nursing officer, chief operating officer, and HR met with the team and informed us that, effective immediately, Dorian was no longer employed by the hospital. We all sat silently and politely until they exited the unit when a loud and spontaneous cheer went up. People were hugging each other and cry-laughing, high fives all around. The aftermath. To the best of my knowledge, Dorian never worked as a registered nurse again. And frankly, I don't care. Kip was fired 3 days later for having been aware of all that was going on and turning a blind eye because apparently he'd been touching women on the unit for a couple of years. I hadn't been aware of that, but it came out in the HR meetings. Dr. Steve was also fired for harassment. The unit hired an old manager of mine who had a long and well-documented history of, you guessed it, harassment. I quit within days of him being offered the job. The department's foray into getting along crumbled. Most of the staff have moved on to other jobs where they seem much happier. So, what do I consider the greatest accomplishment of my career? I sat up straight and smiled and said, when I answered that question, I took a very fractured team and brought them together to achieve a common goal. I like to think I'm really good at team building.